Just like I promised in lab today, when we were in lab today, in lecture, excuse me, today, Wednesday, the 27th of January, I said that I really want our first week or two, we're always kind of get a little behind because, your first day, we're trying to hand out all the paperwork. Typically, in a non COVID world, you guys would have bought that already in, you've had it printed out and all that, but hey, we make this work, right? So the good thing is that we have Canvas where I can put slides up and you guys can look at these slides and and then we can move on and get ourselves back on track with our tentative course calendar in the classroom. So guys, what I need you to do right now is make sure you have out your thin binder, whether you put it in that black binder or whether you have it still in that white binder. This is the binder with your study guides and all that in it for lecture. So make sure you get that out so you can start here so you can go along with me, fill out those study guides so you will have them to study for your first test, okay? So we're going to pick up where we left off in lecture, right? We're talking about um, laboratory safety and hazards that people working in laboratories, whether it's clinics or hospitals, come in contact with. Now, one of the hazards you will have is chemical hazards. And we need to make sure that wherever you go to work, you get the proper training on any type of chemicals that you're using in that area. So we're going to talk about chemical hazard training, and we're going to talk about hazard communication standard. Okay? So besides blood and body fluids that we know as healthcare workers, whether we're working as phlebotomists, lab assistants, lab techs, medical assistants, or nurses, we're going to come in contact with blood and body fluids that have biological hazards, right? We also sometimes work with dangerous chemicals, okay? So we want to make sure that our workers should always have an orientation before handling any hazardous chemicals, right? You always want to have, when you go to work somewhere, they always have orientation and they're going to take you around the hospital if that's where you were to go to work, or take you through the clinic and show you where everything's located, from your break room to your restroom facilities to where you will be working. And then they may show you that the chemicals you'll be working with, the instruments that you've been using, and make sure that you've been oriented on all that. Okay? So let's talk about the federal agencies that regulate that HAZCOM communication standard. Because remember, guys, that HAZCOM or hazard communication standard, a lot of us know it as that right to know law. Okay? And we understand that when we're dealing with things that go on in the workplace, that's OSHA, right? OSHA falls under the Department of Labor, but OSHA is the one that regulates the HAZCOM communication standards or the right to know law. So now we want to talk about 4 types of hazardous chemicals you may come in contact with in your lab. There's things like dangerous acids and bases. We have caustic chemicals that can cause corrosion. Those have to be maintained and stored in the appropriate container, because we would never want that causative agent to eat through that container and then spill out on our counters, right? Then there's flammables. Those are chemicals that we may work with that are easily set fire to, right? They're very combustible. And then there's things that are inhalants. So remember, acids and bases, corrosives or caustics, flammables, and inhalants. So what is the most common chemical hazard encountered in the lab? Bleach. That's why I know bleach has become modern day, everyday use. People don't treat it like the chemical that it is. Bleach can be very hazardous to your health, and you always want to treat it with respect. That's why when we come in every day, right, we know our routine now, right? And not only are we going to come in and do it and we're going to do it correctly, but we're going to get it done as fast as we can, right? We come in with a goal, we come in with purpose, and we're moving, right? And we want to make sure that we have our gloves on and our lab coat on before we get our bleach or any kind of heavy disinfectant and clean our countertops, right? So now we talked in the lab and I showed you guys where the material safety data sheets are located in our lab, right? So these are the chemicals hazard inventory sheets, right? And by law, they must be kept by the employer, usually in some type of notebook. Nowadays, it may be online in some kind of online format, which an online format is fine as long as your employees have access to it and can get to it easily, right? Because all employees by law have a right to know what chemicals they're working with in their workplace, and they have a right to the information that tells them what protective equipment they need to use. Is it flammable? Is it reactivity? Is it hazardous to my health? What should I do if I'm exposed to it, right? All that information is kept in those safety data sheets. These sheets usually come packaged with the chemical when it's purchased, okay? And remember, BIPSI has an entire list of any chemicals that are used campus-wide on their website, okay? But I have a specific red safety data sheets of any chemicals that you in the phlebotomy lab will be using at the front of the lab that you can get at any time. But remember, bleach is the one that as a laboratory employee, you will be exposed to most often. So chemical labels on bottles and the MSDS sheet should be read prior to the use, right? That's what I said. If a new chemical comes in, the company that you ordered it from will have a copy of the MSDS sheet included with that chemical. Someone at your facility should be responsible with reading it, understanding it, delivering it to the department it goes to, making sure someone there reads it, has a copy of it available, and that any employee using that chemical has read that SDS sheet prior to using that chemical, okay? The SDS sheet has the brand name of the chemical, the active ingredients, the quantity, okay? There's lots of signal words in there that you will see, like use caution. It's a warning. It could be a poison, right? That's to alert you to paying attention, right? There's instructions on the proper use and handling of that particular chemical. There's a lot of manufacturing info included in there about the chemical. There's always lists of possible hazards. Like say this is a chemical that if you mix it with bleach or it comes in contact with bleach, it could explode or catch fire. Those are things that will be listed in there under possible hazards, so you will be aware to store it, right, where it doesn't get hot, where it doesn't come into contact with bleach, whatever it may be for that particular chemical. And then the first aid that needs to be done for that particular chemical will be included on that material safety data sheet. So what are two systems for labeling hazardous chemicals? We have the National Paint and Coating Association, the NPCA, and then we have the Hazardous Materials Information System, the HMIS. As you can imagine, people for years and years and years, painters and people who have been using paint, got together and formed the association so that they could keep those kinds of workers informed and safe, okay? So we see, and we talked about this earlier in the classroom, right? So this is an example of the HMIS label that you see here on the screen, and it's for acetone, okay? The health is one, right? And remember, that means that it's a slight hazard to my health, right? And then the red is for flammability, okay? It is seriously flammable. So we need to know that, right? It has zero reactivity, which means minimal reactivity. That doesn't mean it has none, doesn't mean zero. It's very minimal reactivity. And then C is your protective equipment, right? That's the white, right? And listed in that area will tell us if there are some special precautions we need to take beyond the standard for this particular chemical. So make sure that you understand blue is for health, red is for flammability, yellow is for reactivity, and white is special, and it's for the protective equipment. And make sure you understand what these hazard ratings mean for each. And if you spot that label somewhere, you will be able to tell me this information. So you guys make sure you look at this and kind of start memorizing how to read these labels. Again, we looked at this in lab, right? This was on the back. We talked about it in lecture. So you guys, this is that NFPA label, okay? And again, it's still the same. The blue is hazard, health hazard. The red is fire, yellow reactivity, right? And the white is a specific hazard or PPE, right? Or both. So make sure you understand this. And so that triangle there, the number in the blue is going to tell you on here that says it's extremely dangerous to my health. Number 2 says below 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That means it's a fire hazard at below 200, right? And then 1 says it's unstable if heated. So we would want to make sure we keep this particular chemical in a cool, dry place. Right? So now we're talking about the 4 color codes and their hazards that are found on both systems of labeling chemicals, right? And I know we're going over and over this, but you guys, it's going to be on a test. Not only is it going to be on a test that you're going to be graded on, which is important for you as a student, but you're looking at a career in healthcare where you may work in labs, where you may come in contact with chemicals. You need to know this to keep yourself, your co-workers, and your patients safe, right? So make sure you understand blue, yellow, red, and white, okay? So here's one of our critical thinking slides, right? This is where you take what you learn in lab and lecture and put it together so that you can apply it to a scenario that you may run into while you're working out in the field. So do you go to work as a new medical assistant in a doctor's office, right? There's a chemical on the corner that you're not familiar with. It has an HMIS label on it showing a 3 in the blue area and the words gloves and fluid impermeable gown in the white area. What do these things mean? You guys take a minute to pause these slides and make sure you're getting the right answer. This is a really good tool to study by. So pause it now and see if you answer these right. Okay, so if you paused it and you said to yourself that the 3 in the blue area means that it is a serious health threat to me while using this chemical, and the protective equipment that should be worn are gloves and a fluid impermeable gown, then you answered this question correctly. Okay, guys, we're going to do some review. Again, these are a great tool for you to use to study for your test. So when these pop up, what you can do is just pause this video, maybe even get you a piece of paper and a pencil out, write the answers down and see if you're getting the correct answer. You can always go back and watch this over and over again to test yourself. So our first question is, what can you remember about hazardous labeling of chemicals? Again, guys, use this as a way to study. So remember, hazardous labeling falls under OSHA, right? OSHA is that department that falls under federal agency that falls under the Department of Labor, right? Hazardous labeling is important because employees have the right to know, right? HAZCOM communication, what the dangers are for each chemical that they are working with, right? We will need to remember that the type of hazards include hazardous acids and bases, caustics, flammability, and or dangers when inhaled, right? Workers have the right to an orientation at their place of work before handling any hazardous chemicals, and each chemical has an MSDS sheet that gives information about the chemical, including the type of hazard and whatever first aid needs to be given. Okay, this little section's in that little notebook that you're following along, and this is because, guys, I want you to be able to learn to speak intelligently to the physicians you work with, to your co-workers, and to patients. And the way you do that is to be able to really understand the topic and be able to describe stuff or talk about stuff in your own words. So you know this is going to be on a test, right? You want to be able to describe 5 facts about hazardous labeling in your own words. So pause this, and then I'm going to give you some hints, and then you guys fill this out in the space in your paperwork, okay? And then you want to draw a hazardous label and explain what each area means. So make sure you draw that hazardous label out, like that little, looks like a diamond shape, okay? And then explain what each label means, okay? So pause this, kind of practice it, then come back to it and see if you're getting close. But you want to be able to do this on your own in your own words. So you want to make sure your answer contains the following, okay? You want to make sure and understand that you tell people that it falls under the federal agency that is OSHA, right? And that workers have a right to know about the dangers for each chemical. You want to talk about the types of hazards that include acid and bases, caustics, flammability, inflammables, or inhalation, right? Workers have a right to an orientation meeting at their place of work, and each chemical has an MSDS sheet that lists the type of dangers and the first aid that needs to be given, right? And then you can either draw this out in squares, or if you're a really good artist, you can draw it out in a triangle format and put blue as a health hazard, red as flammability hazard, white as specific hazardous or PPE, and yellow as reactive hazard. Guys, you may have a question on your test that says do just this. So if you guys would practice this and be able to do this on your own without looking at anything, you can ace that test, okay? So what should you do to ensure safety from physical hazards, okay? We talk some about biohazard, we talk some about chemical hazards, now there's physical hazards, right? And you need to be trained on this. Now some of those hazards are like electricity, right? We use microscopes and lots of different laboratory instruments that are plugged up into the outlets. Are they grounded? Are the cords frayed? Is there any issues like that, right? And is the cord laying down so when someone could trip over it and fall, things of that nature. Then we have to worry about things like fire and bad weather, terrorist attacks, okay? And you always want to run periodic drills so that everybody will know exactly what to do when a fire or some bad weather incident comes along. Lifting, you need to know how to lift properly, right? You lift with your legs, not your back. And you want to avoid twisting your back while moving heavy objects, okay? Your hair, right? It can be a physical hazard. When we work in the hospitals, I always wore my hair back because I don't want it to get down into any chemicals or reagents that I'm using, that it can get on me, or I didn't want blood or any other body fluids to get in my hair while I was taking care of patients. In trash. Why trash? Okay? Remember, I always tell you guys, even now, and I know we always want to throw the trash in the right trash container, right? Because it's expensive. Having said that, I want you guys to start right now putting it, even if it's imaginary blood and body fluid, if you know that it would have blood and body fluid, in the right container. Because the more you practice at doing it over and over and over and over again the correct way, then you're less likely to accidentally throw a dirty needle or a bloody gauze into the regular trash, and then the trash person comes along, goes to pick it up, they push their hand down in the trash can to push it down, and what happens? A needle sticks them in their hand, okay? So make sure you think before you toss, you keep your piles separate, okay? And never walk over to a trash can in a laboratory and put your bare hand in it to push the trash down. Now remember, I put up those 3 separate videos on safety training in the lab, including donning and doffing of your PPE. Okay? So make sure when you're putting them on, okay, a lot of times I want you to wash your hands, put on your gown, your mask, and your gloves. Now, you will come into class with your mask on. And I want all of you to work really, really hard on making sure that you have that mask in the seat of your car right next to you. So that when you get to Bipsy's parking lot, it's laying right there. You pick it up, put it on your face before you ever get out of your car, so that when you walk in and come into the building and come into the classroom, you do not expose me or your fellow students, okay, to possible COVID-19, okay? Make sure you keep that mask up above your nose so that you're not exposing me or your classmates to possible COVID-19, okay? When you're removing them, you take your gloves off properly. I've shown y'all how to do it. We've discussed it. I put a video up online. Then your mask, then your gloves. Please make sure that you watch those safety videos. Don't blow that off and act like you don't have time for it. Remember, the most important thing about this is the healthcare workers' buy-in. If you don't take this stuff serious and take the time to properly learn how to do it, then it's not going to work, okay? Now, you want to be able to name 4 types of gloves. We talked about latex, right? Sometimes we don't use those because people have latex allergies, right? So there's vinyl, nitrile. Both vinyl and nitrile don't have latex in them. And then we have chemically clean gloves we know about, right? That we use for routine venipuncture, and then they're sterile. So if you need to name 4 types of gloves, latex, vinyl, nitrile. We already know those are chemically clean. And then your 4th one would be sterile gloves. We want to be able to describe the implications of HIPAA in various medical settings, okay? So we're moving on to HIPAA now, okay? Because these are things that you guys need to be aware of when you're dealing with patients, okay? When you're working in a hospital or a lab, okay? Remember, we talked about this before. Healthcare workers cannot disclose any information to a third party without the signed consent of the person's information that you are disclosing. This includes insurance companies, attorneys, and curious neighbors, right? And we already know curious neighbors, but you need to understand, without signed consent from your patient, you are not able to release their information to an insurance company or an attorney. And it includes acknowledging whether or not the person in question is a patient, okay? Healthcare workers cannot decide confidentiality based on whether or not he or she approves of or agrees with the views or morals of the patient, okay? You may have to take care of a patient that you don't agree with the way they live, you don't agree with their politics, you don't agree with their religion. It doesn't matter. As a healthcare worker, you treat all the patients the same no matter what. And remember, when we're talking about disclosing confidential information, we're also talking about financial information about that patient. Healthcare workers cannot use the patient's name when talking on the telephone where others might overhear. And sometimes we forget about that, right? We get in a hurry, we're talking, we don't stop and pay attention to where we're talking, how loud our voice is, or if we're near other people who can overhear us. Always try to understand, what if it was you? What if that was your patient information, your mother's patient information? Guys, take the time to think, okay? When you're talking about a patient, be careful of where you are when you're talking about them. You also never want to leave anything laying around or talk in a way that would allow one patient to see or view another patient's information from the computer screen or any paperwork you have laying around. You do not give out results about medical tests over the phone where others might hear you. Furthermore, you do not leave confidential information on answering machines or voicemails or their place of employment. You cannot leave medical charts or insurance reports out where other people can see them. You don't want to release privileged information if the patient is unwilling for it to be released. In other words, if your patient does not want her medical record or her medical information, including her appointments or what she's there for, released to her children or her husband, then we are not allowed to do it by law. Without her signing a form giving us consent to do that, we are legally not allowed to do it. So now we're going to talk about the process in compliance reporting of unsafe activities, including the incident report, right? We talked about this in lab and on Monday. And remember, email me if you do not have that worksheet form, okay? Also, if you filled that out already and put a lot of information on it, that might not be the correct information, or if you see that it might not be the correct information and you need another copy, get with me immediately so I can make a copy for you and bring it to class on Monday, because we're going to go over it. And that's one of those things that you guys are going to take home for homework and fill out for yourself and turn it in for a grade. An employee who sustains an injury, any injury, or becomes ill as a result of unsafe activities in the workplace must verbally report the injury or illness to their manager and or supervisor, right? Immediately. Now, it doesn't even have to be your manager or supervisor, but it needs to be reported to a manager or supervisor of that facility immediately. If, because of the nature of the injury or illness, an employee is unable to report it, let's just say that they're unconscious, it is the responsibility of any other worker who happens upon the incapacitated worker to promptly report the event to the manager or supervisor, and then at that time, an incident report must be filled out. Okay, guys, so in summary, we have talked about the reasons laboratory tests are ordered and how specimens are analyzed. We talked about the necessary attributes required of a laboratory professional, right? We talked about using requisitions with proper documentation and confidentiality. We talked about applying the CDC standard precaution for infection control and proper hand hygiene. We talked about OSHA regulations regarding the bloodborne pathogen standard and the hazard communication program, the right to know, right? We talked about proper disposal of biohazard waste, the proper action to take after an exposure incident. Remember, we wash it out first, then report it, right? And then we make sure in the end we get medical care, right? We talked about safety rules that must be observed in the laboratory at all times, including proper donning and doffing of our PPE. Don't forget, study all the key terms and abbreviations for the test. Most of the missed questions come from not knowing these terms. I am going to slowly go through these terms on the screen. I'm not going to read each one of them to you because I know you guys can read. But this is a great opportunity for you guys to use this as a study tool, like Quizlet. The question up here, I'm going to read the first one, but I'm not going to read the rest of them. What is another name for an outpatient facility? Once you read them, okay, I'm going to give you enough time for you to be able to pause this video, see if you answer the question correctly, then you can start it up again and we will go through these review questions. But again, don't forget, study all the key terms and abbreviations for the test. Okay, guys, make sure that you understand that I want you to have, we're talking about homework assignments, okay? Make sure that you chart, right? Remember when we did the practice venipuncture in the classroom, I asked you to fill out your requisition form with your patient's information. Once you would have stuck your, and I get it, a fake patient, you would have put the date and the time that you stuck them all on your requisition form, right? Your requisition form had an X by glucose fasting. And remember, there's a difference between just glucose and glucose fasting, right? And so your homework assignment for lab was to go back, find your chart, and it should have last name, comma, first name, turn over, and for that particular thing that we did with the venipuncture chart, you have an example up at the front that will show you how to do that, okay? Make sure you go through your lab packets on the stuff we've done so far, not only to read it and become familiar with it, but make sure that all your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and check marked or checked, right? Okay, as far as lecture is concerned, I wanted to put these up so we can get caught up. So between now and Monday for homework, you're going to watch these videos. Make sure you watch the 3 safety videos I put up. Okay, fill out your study guides and start studying. We will work on that incident report for blood exposure starting on Monday. But again, if you don't have that form for whatever reason, please email and let me know so I can have one for you. Make sure you look on your tentative course calendar so you'll know tentatively when our first test is coming in both lab and lecture. Okay, make sure you understand what you're supposed to study for the test. Remember, look in the small binder, whether you put it in a black one or you still left it in that white one. There are study guides for each one of the tests in there, including that one for the profiles and panels. Okay? Right when we finish our lab packet, typically that's when we have our first test right after that. Y'all will turn that lab packet in for a grade. I will be lenient on the first packet, and after that, I'm going to be grading really hard. And what I'm looking for is, did you follow directions? Did you use a black ballpoint pen? Did you check all your check boxes, dot all your I's, cross all your T's? Did you do everything correctly the way you were supposed to? Okay? If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, please make sure that you reach out to me by email. If we can't solve the problem by email, we can set up some kind of phone meeting or even a Zoom meeting. Okay, guys. One thing I did want to touch base with y'all on too, that question that said, when it was asking you about your patient that was on blood thinners, and would that be diagnosing, treating, or monitoring them? And the answer was monitoring. I just wanted to touch on that because here's the deal, guys. So if we put our patient on blood thinners, okay, the doctor is never going to put them on a medication like blood thinners unless he's already established a diagnosis, okay? That should make sense to you. He's already ran lab tests, done other testing, and a heart cath, whatever it may be, okay? And he's decided what is wrong with that patient. Okay, so he's already diagnosed them. And then obviously the treatment for his diagnosis was blood thinners. He put him on blood thinners to prevent him from throwing a clot, him or her, right? So now he needs to monitor that patient by doing tests to see if he's getting enough blood thinner but not too much, right? So that's why the answer was monitor, because obviously he'd already diagnosed him, because you're not going to put them on blood thinners unless you've already established what is wrong with your patient. And obviously they've already treated them because the blood thinners were the treatment, right? So now what you do is want to monitor the amount of blood thinner they're on to make sure they're getting enough to do the job, but they're not getting too much, okay? So just in case anybody had an issue with that particular question, I wanted to make sure I addressed it. So you guys, please watch this video. Fill out the study guides in your thin binder. So when you come into class on Monday, we will have finished this and we will move on to the next one because we want to work to get caught up because we do all we can in here and COVID makes it hard and the first weeks always make it hard, but we want to get back on track to our tentative course calendar. Okay, again, guys, any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to shoot me an email. You guys have a great weekend. Thank you.